All right, Shalom. Welcome back to the Zarua Beit Midrash. We're in the seventh sugya of our 66. We're on page 59 of Bava Metzia. We've been talking about Ona'at Divarim in addition to the Ona'ah in the marketplace, the fraud, the deception, and ways that we manipulate others. We also have insults and injury and transgressions against our fellow men and women with words. Some of those words that we might really sin with are to remind a convert where they come from, or that they are a sinner, or that their ancestors were idolaters. And some of those words are really about the ideas that are out there in terms of putting someone to shame in general. So verbal ona'ah, those with words, they kind of are in the midst of this conversation, comparing it to fraud and faulty words, or ways we even are faulty shoppers with our words to show interest. That is a discussion that's stemming from the pages that came before. And before the next chapter is going to start, this chapter is really ending with our sugya, which we haven't noted before, but the way chapters end in the Talmud is very important. The way chapters begin, the way chapters end, we've said before, is very important. So we're going to think about that in terms of how this ends, or at least the discussion before the next really last section, as chapter 4 is coming to a close. We could call this, a multi-part sugya, but in some ways, it's all wrapped into the end of the chapter here. And we don't want to remind someone then of the deeds of their fathers. Those are words which we really cannot share. And the friends of Job came and they said, well, if you would have been a little bit more righteous, maybe God wouldn't have delivered all these sufferings upon you. We talked about this idea that in the ancient world, sufferings were in some ways connected to the potential sins we had, and people accepted that a little bit more than today in terms of a theology. But yet, the Gemara in the discussion, and this I don't think I shared as succinctly as I want to tonight, the Gemara brought us in the midst of a discussion about Onat Devarim to say, boy, is that really what you want to say to your friends? Is that a way to talk to someone who's in the midst of sickness, who's in the midst of really suffering a death of a child? You're here burying a child, and this is what you say? Be really careful. And it kind of comes back and says, Rabbi Yehuda kind of brings it back and says, don't even cast eyes on the merchandise that you have no money for. Meaning they're still mixing this marketplace idea about how you're behaving in the marketplace with how you're actually speaking to people in the everyday world of community kind of connectivity. And so they want you to make more of a blending of the marketplace and what I called the marketplace of our lives, the shuk, the square, the public square. And so one of the reasons why we stem from the whole discussion in Bava Metzia of marketplace ethics to Bein Adam L'Chaveiro kind of ethics between us and other people is because this is about the public square, the public community, the group, the family we live in with, the community we make.
A quick question.
Okay, Bobby, quick question.
Is this different or under the umbrella of Lashon Hara?
Oh, so that's a good question, because we like to have different categories of mitzvahs. We are a taxonomic people in that vein. Or as we've heard from others, we like value concepts. Max Kadushin is a scholar at the seminary, wrote about value concepts and to have value concepts. As I was learning it throughout rabbinical school and all through the years, I often thought of these questions as to why do I need individual labels when it seems that we've got one kind of transgression here that fits? And so we could say, those words are A, B, C, and D, let's say. Well, the more labels we attach, it's kind of like the hashtags or kind of like the search words that Google optimizes. So here's a way to think about it. Yeah, it seems like some of this is Lashon Hara in the classic sense of it's really casting aspersions on people. And that's a whole category that I want to avoid. And it's called Ona'at Devarim as well. And so distinctions and differences help me understand the various faces of the crime. You know, if we were going to say you could have multiple charges on the books for different criminal actions, then maybe I want and need more of those kinds of descriptors. And so, yes, it is Lashon Hara in many cases here. Maybe there's one or another case that would lead you to have a chavruta with somebody and say, well, this one seems like really Lashon Hara, and this one really fits into the category of Ona'at Devarim. And even if that was just an intellectual exercise, like some of our sages really enjoy going through, it's for the purpose of using our texts to refine our ultimate, like, shev aseh, or shev velo taseh. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to not do anything yet. I'm going to sit here and then I'm going to get up and go do something, meaning what's going to allow me to go do something in a more holy way, but to learn Torah, right? So little mod, little med, lishmor v'la'asot. I'm going to learn and then teach it and then say it and then keep the value, and then I'm going to go act on it. So I think the more we have those concepts, the more we're able to use them to refine our ways of thinking about any given propensity we have as humans to share words that sometimes just don't hit the mark, and in the natural sense, and the kind of words that I have to think about saying. Last note on that, it's like, as we study words and what we say and how we share with each other, and whether we talk at all or go and ask merchants or think about what we might want to say or need to say to somebody in a given situation, you can either trip over yourself, like when they ask the centipede how he dances with 100 feet and starts to think about it and then he trips. Or you could use it as a way of like refining until the time that you're out there and you're being yourself, and then you can't think so much because you basically, what is it called when I overthink something to the point where I don't act?
Paralysis by analysis.
Exactly. And paralysis by analysis, the rabbis don't want us to really face, because we are people of action. So you want to not overthink. In the moment, you hope that you've lived reflectively enough through your lessons and the limud and learning and having all these categories to not get paralyzed in the moment. And so when you open your mouth, you shouldn't regret what your tongue leads you towards. Right. That's the real challenge here. I think that, and that's part of why we're going through these different lessons. We're going to today encounter some text that might seem very, very much like part of the ancient world of values that we've grown from and overcome and rejected, even that our sages might have considered. But again, being public with these things, writing them on a page of Talmud, one of the principled looks at Talmud we could have, or the ways that we think about the rabbis being principled people, is to describe the Talmud as the blotter of ideas that were circulating around the time that they knew would be advanced within the study hall and into perpetuity, and say, agree or disagree. Take a look at these and now refine the type of thinking that you see in front of you on the blotter. This wasn't kept inside some study hall. This was produced to have people come for Shabbos in the afternoon so that we could hear the thoughts of our sages and drashot from our sages about what's going on. And I could very much imagine this part of the Talmud being a very public take on all these very, very particular laws about the marketplace. To me, what sometimes is literary, theory of the Gemara. How do you get to some of these is because maybe they were doing some learning about the marketplace. And then there's this turn with this Mishnah that says, and let us tell you, just as there's ona'ah in the marketplace, so too is there ona'ah with your words. And careful as you go. Careful with your words. Let's reflect on what they mean and what that whole concept is about. Okay, so other questions before we push on?
I have a thought on this,
Yeah.
on the story with the Yov, because I was wrestling with the, trying to match, the straightforward meaning of the word hona'ah, which is deception, with this one. So this is how I managed to resolve it. It's like saying the wrong thing. This would be the abuse of words. Now, why would it apply to Yov? Because those friends are telling him,
Eov is Job in
Job,
English.
okay, Job.
Eov in Hebrew.
Okay. So, so they're telling him, that his friends said to him, like blamed him. Their words blame him
Yeah,
because you are suffering because you must have done something. It's a blame. And Eov was not to blame for his suffering because it was the Satan, the Satan that made the deal or came down to test him, to try him out. So Eov cannot be blamed for that. Eov was righteous. He led a righteous life. So how can he be blamed for that? He didn't do it. And his friends are telling him you did it. So it's casting blame where it shouldn't be. And that would
Nice.
be wrong words. Wrong words is not on but it's saying the wrong thing. That's how I managed to.
well, you can see a different face of ona'ah then. If ona'ah could be translated as deception, hona'ah then could be translated as misplaced blame.
Exactly. So it's
Nice.
this is how I was able to connect the basic concept with the story of Job. Otherwise, I
Right.
couldn't see any connection. And this is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what
He's being blamed for something he didn't do.
that's exactly what Talmud does. It helps us expand our understanding, even though at first we wouldn't use that for the word in modern Hebrew. Good. So that's where we are. I'm going to take us back into the Gemara. Everybody out there in Zoomland see the text? Rabbi Yochanan?
Yes,
Yeah?
we can
Yes.
see it.
Great. And how's the microphone? Is the microphone good? Sound check.
Excellent.
Good, very good.
All right, you can hear everybody else. You can hear me?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to go into the daf here by Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishun Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. These are bigwigs, just to keep in mind. Gadol ona'at devarim me'ona'at mamon. שזה נאמר בו ויראת מלך, וזה לא נאמר בו ויראת מלך. One Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, greater is the transgression of verbal mistreatment, of verbal oppression, of verbal exploitation, verbal insults, than the transgression of monetary exploitation. And he's looking, and he's particularly picking out about the verses that we compared. One is stated, and you shall fear your God, about the verbal treatment, mistreatment, we should say. But with regard to monetary, it's not, doesn't have this phrase, and you shall fear your God. So let's say you wanted to know what and you shall fear your God really meant. In one case, I could say it means I'm going to fear God's punishment. But what they're taking is the phrase that says this one's a bigger crime than that one. That's what that phrase could mean in and of itself. ורבי אלעזר אומר, זה בגופו וזה בממונו. Elazar says, this verbal mistreatment affects one's body, but the monetary exploitation affects the money. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar, זה ניתן להשיבון, וזה ניתן להישבון. This monetary exploitation is given to restitution, but זה לא ניתן להישבון. But verbal mistreatment is not really given to restitution. In other words, can you take back those words? You remember the famous story with the feather pillow? It's usually used in the context that Bobby brought us before about Lashon Hara. So many people are speaking negatively about each other, and they go to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, take feather pillow and bring it to me. What do I need a feather? Now cut the feather pillow, fly it around your head. He said, what am I doing, kaparas? And the feathers fly everywhere. And now he says, put the feathers back. He says, I can't, they've flown to all kinds of, that's like your words, he says. That's like your words. You'll never get them back into that pillow. No comfort after such discomforting words, after such abuse, verbal abuse, mistreatment. So verbal abuse really is all about what Rabbi Yochanan is teaching, and they make the claim, and the Gemara is going to continue. Tane Tana Kame de Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Gemara relates that the Tana who recited Mishnayot and Braitot in the study hall taught a Braita before Rabbi Nachman. Kol hamalbin b'nei chaveiro barabim keilu shofech damim. Very, very famous limud. Anyone who humiliates another in public, it is as though he were spilling blood. He was a murderer. So murdering with words. You want to know what Ona'at Devarim is being likened to? So it's verbal abuse, it's deception, it's misplaced blame, and now it's murder.
So is that how it's related to the body? Because it says this afterwards.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. We have a body relationship right there, and the blood and the body are all coming together from that paragraph that we saw before. Amar lei, he says to him, Shapir Kamart, that's very nice that you said that. I love it when you have the positive reinforcement of the Rebbes sometimes. You know, they're sometimes going to disagree with somebody very vehemently, but they also have a nice little positive encouragement. Shapir Kamar. He said such a nice Dvar Torah, such a nice connection, such a nice way of phrasing it. The Chazain le de Azil Sumaka v'ate Havara. We see that after the humiliated person blushes, the red leaves his face and a whiteness overcomes, and that's tantamount to spilling blood. Amar le Abaye le Rav Dimi. So Rav Abaye says to Rav Dimi, Rava b'may zehire. In the west, over there in Eretz Yisrael, because remember where they are, Israel's west. We're talking about the Babylonian crew now. And this is the Babylonian Talmud after all. In the west over there in Eretz Yisrael, with regard to which mitzvah are they really vigilant? Amarle be'achvur re'ape. Rav Dimi says to him, they're vigilant in refraining from humiliating others. Now this is exactly how the state of Israel functions today, and all Jews in the state of Israel. That was tongue in cheek. Just so we know, like, if people understand people at any given moment in history or time or generation, or maybe it's said with some type of tongue-in-cheekness, some type of irony, some type, I don't know exactly. There's, as I've taught before in the Beit Midrash, and we've talked about, there's lots of different ways of insulting people in the Talmud, and especially between East and West, no love lost. And so maybe they think they're really careful over here, and it's somehow like a backwards way of saying, like, are they careful with this in Israel too? Like, are you saying we have to be so mad? Maybe, or they're saying, do we have to follow it? Let's read it on its face. In Israel, they're careful. The Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Hakol Yordin Legehenna, Chutz Mishlosha. Rabbi Chanina says everybody descends to Gehenna except for 3.
Gehenna is hell.
Now, Gehenna is some type of purgatory. I mean, let's say that the concept of hell with a Satan and fire burning is a very Christianized concept of Gehenna. Gehenna is at least in the Midrashic layers of our tradition, it's a stopping place for souls who don't make it completely to whatever we think is Olam Haba, the world to come. Let's say it another way. There was a valley called Gehenna, Gehenom, where it's still there, right? So it's where you threw bodies and their bones were there, and they didn't have a proper place to lay the remains, and they would get piled up. At one point, that was a way that they might be describing that valley, that it's kind of a no place kind of way or land, that your vessel was not respected the way that it was back in the times of the rabbis, because remember, we didn't have burial the way exactly we have today. You had a machpelah, marada machpelah, you had the burial cave by our ancestors, and then you had these kind of, you could entomb somebody by way of bringing their body to a certain shelf, and then as soon as their body decays, you bring their bones and you put it in the special bone box, the ossuaries, and you have this beautiful respect this way until the time that we had this other kind of burial. So Gehenna, though, doesn't necessarily, by way of the early biblical era up through certain parts of the Talmudic era, even really mean a purgatory for someone's soul. Well, remember, in this time, there's some swirling and different ideas about what really goes on in the afterworld. And one of the reasons why I want to use it in this kind of sugya, and one of the reasons why I want to now start mentioning Gehenna, and one of the reasons I want to start mentioning Olam Haba, is because for the people really taking on some of this new idea that we really do have a soul that's completely on its journey, and that I could be stuck forever, like the rabbis of the Midrash, which might be a little earlier than some of the conversations that we see Talmudically, like they were saying about, the Korachites, the ones who rebelled, that they were stuck in the layers of Gehenna, always singing that Moses was right, instead of Korach, their leader, the rebel. And if they didn't want to get stuck in any of these kind of places that were being described, or the place being described in several different ways, most likely, and we could invite scholars to talk more about the various ways that they were being described and they were potentially understood by people who were receiving this language that Gehenna is a real place. This is what you don't want. Muchlat. Whatever it was, you don't want it. You'd rather be in Olam Haba than Gehenna. And that we know. So let's call it Jewish hell for sake of it's a Jewish hell. Exactly what it was. I'm not claiming one exact description that I know how to say it to you, and that I know how to tell you exactly what they meant.
Or purgatory?
It was purgatory for several kinds of takes on it, that your soul could start there and then leave and get back to a journey to Olam Haba, and others would be stuck, and some just didn't inherit the next world. And they didn't even would they go to Gehenna, or would they just be forever condemned to not being by Hashem? So that's another way of looking at it, that you didn't necessarily have this one address if you didn't get Olam Haba. That's the ideas going around. Those are the ideas going around at the time. So everybody goes to Gehenna except three is like saying, oh, I want to be among the three, right? And so, Akol Sal Kadatach, does it enter your mind that everyone descends to Gehenna? Rather say, Ela Ema, we should say it like this, Kol Ayodin LeGehenim Olim, all those who go to Gehenna then go up and leave Gehenna, because it's a purgatory of sorts, it's a stopping station, it's a way station for my soul before I get to Olam Haba. And this is really how I want to phrase it, so that I can understand, based on what we generally understand is the journey of the soul after death. Chutz mishlosha sheyordin ve'enolim. But there are three that go down to Gehenna, into purgatory, and ultimately stay there. They don't come up. Ve'elu hein. And these are them, haba al eshet ish, the one who has intercourse with a married woman, and that is an eshet ish, is a promised woman who's not yet done all the full marriage rites, who we say in our Jewish law is as married, and if you would have intercourse with her, you are committing adultery, and it's the crime of eshet ish. V'hamalbim pnei chavero barabim, and there's our phrase, the one who causes all the blood to flow out of the face after one embarrasses him so much that his face turned burning bright red and then immediately turns to this white, right? That's what I mean by hamalbin. Lavan is white. Malbin, Pnei Chavero. I cause my friend's face to become white in public. That is due to the fact that I've just verbally abused him, embarrassed him to the point, humiliated with words this friend of mine, this fellow of mine. And the third, the hamechaneh shem ra lechavero, and the one who calls another a derogatory name. So anybody who calls another a derogatory name, big problems. Going to Gehenna and not coming up. Let's look at what the halacha says on that. One who humiliates another in public. So here's the quick take. One who coins a derogatory name for another or uses a pre-existing derogatory name receives a place in the world to come only if he repents fully. Rambam's going to give that person a chance, even though it says in our Talmud that a person goes down and never comes up. So the Rambam is very much open to tshuva. And thereby what? Like if we were to study the Rambam after we study this Gemara, one might say, come on, Jews, you can't just say fully evil, forever evil, if you're using bad names. And it's not to the point like names will never hurt me. We're saying names do hurt. But we're also saying that the Rambam makes for the possibility of tshuva, for someone to really do tshuva. And by the way, if you're really studying the sources on tshuva, which we're not tonight, but we're going to do it a different time, what's the whole point of one of the sugyas, the famous sugyas? You can buy your whole world to come with one word, with 1 minute, in 1 hour, in one act. We create space for people to show themselves to be Balei Tshuva. And what do we say about Balei Tshuva in the Mishnah? Wasn't that one of the examples? That ultimately, if I remind the Baal Tshuva of his transgression, I'm committing Ona'at Devarim. And so Ona'at Devarim places blame, misplaces blame, because my philosophical approach to giving people a chance to make tshuva and encouraging them to do so by living in a life of morality or returning to it or learning about the possibility of bringing themselves to it, that's my job as a Jew. Not to point out how evil someone was. Because really, that's the takeaway so far. I'm speaking evil. I'm bringing names up about other people who may be bringing names out against other people, who may be verbally abusive. If I start calling them names, I'm not living the way that the rabbis are philosophically trying to encourage me as the reflective Jewish soul in the world that I am in the marketplace of my life out there in the world. One who calls another a derogatory name is even prohibited to call another by a derogatory name that he's accustomed to, if the intent is to humiliate him. So that's a big challenge. And so we really have this challenge in our world today. I really feel it's out there. And we have a lot of people using really nasty names. And it's in everyday life, it's in the midst of the marketplace of our management in marketplaces, government in the way we see people bringing out the worst in each other. It's in the way that Jews are screaming and yelling at each other pre-October 7th, and now in the midst of this disagreement we're having. And these are so difficult to actually live out, because the thought behind it is so powerful. What happened? Where did I go? I wanted to come back up here to say, in the beginnings of the Gemara, remember that. If one is penitent, another may not say to him, remember your earlier deeds. It's very, very difficult to achieve. Minds and souls, we want to keep people in mind about their sins sometimes, and we don't open the possibility, and we don't try to become the instruments of bringing people back to the tshuva and then really believing in them after the tshuva. So, all right, we went up to the notes. We said greater is this verbal mistreatment than monetary, and now we spilling blood. It's like spilling blood. And then we said no, but maybe 3 who go down and go up. Chutz mishlosha, outside of these 3, these are them. The one who commits this sexual crime, the one who spills the blood of his friend by the verbal abuse and calling names, is a separate category, even though it might sound a little bit like when Bobby, you said Lashon Hara. I'm just going to go back to it to say we have lots of categories where we're careful about our words. Here is another category, not as popular as Lashon Hara, for those who knew Onat Devarim. Oh, you might know Onat Devarim. It's very hard to remember that there's also another category, Hamechane. And so sometimes people will say that, like, don't be Mechane. Don't call him a name. You just made up a crazy name. Don't call him a name. It's the worst in us to come up with such things, according to the way the Gemara is presenting it.
So Rabbi, I hate to be so black and white, but like if I want to come home and complain about a coworker or something like that to my husband, it's not public. In other words, I'm not humiliating the person in public. He doesn't know that person. Am I allowed to think it? Am I allowed to feel it? Am I allowed to? I'm just like, where are the boundaries?
We're going to highlight that word barabim, okay? We're going to say that is a great shaila on the daf. That's a question on the page.
Okay.
And you're going to be asking the same question, Baruch Shekiv. You could say Baruch Shekivanti, or I could say Baruch Shekivant. Blessed that you thought the same way that Rambam also thought, because Rambam has the same question. And what I'm going to say is that before we go on, I'm going to take us to some other sources. But if we want to sharpen and clarify questions or say anything before I bring you to that very source that he's going to relate to this, we're gonna look at it there. We still may not get all of our answers from there. We may still have to, about the what do I do with my feelings? How am I going to really grapple with this when I come home? Is that the same when I share it with a spouse, right? But we're gonna at least,
But public is more than 3 people.
we're gonna let the sources start us there, and then we're gonna get back there.
Yeah, but so I need a little bit more context for this 3 business.
So
So,
we didn't have 3 yet. That was only Mindy brought up 3.
no, but I'm just saying, we did have
3
3.
incidents.
We
3
went-
Oh, you mean the 3 that don't
So-
zoche to rise, the
So
3 that
just-
don't merit to rise to Olam Haba.
So the general statement is, everybody descends, everybody will ascend except for the 3. And here they're pointing out three things, which I certainly agree are certainly not admirable. But I can certainly think of a lot of other things that would be really or more troublesome to me in terms of human behavior. So is this just relating to this one particular area of human behavior?
Great.
Is this-
Great question. Talmudic literature question, okay? Let me get this other tractate. Important before we push on to the later halachic work that we're gonna get into because of Mindy's question. But where is this sector? I'm bringing to the table Sanhedrin when I find it. Sanhedrin. Okay, so the whole notion of anything three, al shlosha devarim haolam omed, we say, let's say in the positive, ala Torah, ala avodah, al gimilut chasadim. We say three things the world stands on: Torah, avodah, gimilut chasadim. So those three things are one version of that. Then by Mishnah 18 of the same chapter in Pirkei Avot, I got three different ones. I've got truth, I've got justice, I've got peace. So al shlosha devarim. Wait. Didn't I just say the other three? So this is a very famous rhetorical device of the rabbis to give you an organizing principle of, oh, that's another three. This is a triplet. This is a triplet. That's a triplet. By having certain texts that deal with value statements and assertions, the rabbis organize them into three. Now, the reason I'm bringing you this other text from Sanhedrin in chapter 11, which we learned several years ago in the Beit Midrash, is because you also might say, wait a minute, is there not another way to express who gets Olam Haba and who doesn't? Because here we're really interested in who's going here. So Gehenna, I translated as purgatory. For one other way that people saw it was, it's the station stop for everyone when God asks you all the requisite questions about whether or not you were involved with Torah in your life. You made time for business and you were ethical in it. Did you have the right kinds of family relationships? Did you at least try to make tshuva? Did you have experience trying to come closer to me in your life? Did you take time out to pray and learn? And that's based on different versions of the question. This notion of cheshbon nefesh and the judging of souls happens in Gehenna. So you could say one way to look at Gehenna is it's like the courtroom of your life before you get to Olam Haba, which is why you have the three that are kept from moving on to Olam Haba. But remember, in chapter 11 of Sanhedrin, here's the other way they're going to say it. All Israel has a share in the world to come. Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek ba'olam haba. As they said, your people are all righteous. Forever they shall inherit the land. However, elu she'ein lehem chelek ba'olam haba. But these are the people who don't have a share in the world to come. There's not just shlosha here. And then it starts you on a list. Those, and by the way, it starts with more philosophical. Those who don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Those who say the Torah is not from heaven. One who uproots religious beliefs. And Rabbi Akiva adds those who read the external books, study the wrong stuff. And another says, these are the three kings and four commoners that have no share. So I had three over there, but then I had four. And so I bring it as examples of the way the rhetorical framework, the rhetoric of the rabbis comes to bring us into the picture that this is what they believe. Here are three that are exemplary of, and there's more to the discussion. And by bringing ourselves to all these different places in the Talmudic literature about whether it's defining Gehenna and Olam Haba, or thinking about what merits you a place in the world to come, or keeps you from rising to that Olam Haba. There's a wider discussion. It's not an end-all be-all conversation. All right, so that's really important, and thank you for bringing us to the way they're asserting it.
So my second question is, with our kids, of course, when I did Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other.
Oh, I love that game.
Right, so, the number 2 and 3 on that list look like they're in the same universe of behaviors, but number 1 is very different.
Right.
Meaning having sex with a pregnant woman.
Not pregnant,
With a
married.
married woman.
Yeah, an engaged
So-
woman.
So, so the sort of trio here doesn't quite seem to have, I'm missing the theme.
That's right. That's right.
Seem to be two.
You know, what's
different-
fascinating is because I have another limud where 3 things come to bear too. This is the way also rabbinic text works. Next level, you're just reminding me by asking the second part of your question. So what are the 3 things that I say be killed and do not do? Right?
Idolatry, having sex inappropriately, and murder.
That's right, if they tell me to kill somebody. So automatically, those who go down and don't come up, I might take that 3 when they say al shlosha, because my brain works in 3s, that the rabbis have given me these triplets, and I now say, oh, that's of course the answer. And over here, what's so interesting about the way Rabbi Hanina says it, and it's given Rabbi Hanina, and it's not this rabbi who taught it over here, is he now is going to bring you 1, the sexual relations thing, obviously. And yeah, we're talking about someone who kills here, shofech damim. It's still a shofech damim. It's still murder. But now he's saying that it's shofech damim through words. It's murder through words, in addition to, so I obviously have to avoid that as well. I can't murder through words. And the other one, the calling names, let's say I'm doing this exercise intellectually of paralleling those 2 sources, I could say, oh, that's making me the power, and I basically have in terms of idolatry in some ways, I've so empowered myself to be godly in that sense, to have the power, that I'm now the idolater because I'm calling this a name.
I know I misstated, the one is incest.
Well, it's sexual crimes, but that's still that's
Yeah.
that's the paradigmatic for any sexual crime as well.
Okay.
Okay, so those are some of the pieces that came to light here. Look at the sources with me. Let's see, where is it? Let's go over here. No, that's not what I wanted to share. I need, here's what I need. All right, so right there's Zoom. I don't need Zoom. I don't need, no, that I don't need. Here it is. Okay, so I prepared a source sheet for us, embarrassing people publicly. So here we are. Why are we, what do we say? Malbin Pnei Chavero Barabim, instead of just kill him with words, because the blood went from his face, right? That's what we just read in the Gemara. I'm just quoting the Gemara to say, here's where we are. That's based in Velotonu Ishet Amito V'Yareta Melohecha, because remember we said this is God, this is the level of you should really fear God, or the fear of God. You should have the fear in you of saying these evil words, and it's really a godly mitzvah to really consider. Now, this is the Mishnah Torah, the human dispositions. Rambam has a section, Hilchot Deot is often translated as human dispositions, and so this gets into a little bit of the question that you brought us towards. Isn't our disposition to really have a bad day with a coworker, or worse, we really don't like someone as a character in the marketplace of our lives? At first, a person who admonishes a colleague should not speak to him harshly until he becomes embarrassed. So how we interact and relate to people within our business lies, the marketplace, the true marketplace, you should say you should not bear a sin because of them. That's the Leviticus verse that we just studied. This is what our sages said. Should you rebuke him to the point that his face changes color? The Torah states, don't bear sin because of him. From this we learn that it's forbidden for a person to embarrass. And here the Rambam, you know, we have different manuscripts of the Rambam, and some say a fellow Jew and just embarrass another person. Depending on which manuscript of the Mishnah Torah you get, it's more universal or less universal. That's just going to happen by way of the way the codes were copied and who was the copyist of the original code. How much more so is it forbidden to embarrass him in public? Even though a person who embarrasses a colleague is not liable for lashes on account of him, it is a great sin. Our sages said a person who embarrasses a colleague in public does not have a share in the world to come. Puts it in that sense. Instead of just being in Gehenna, he talks about it in Olam Haba language. Find just the equal opposite. Therefore, a person should be careful not to embarrass a colleague, whether of great or lesser stature, in public, and not to call him a name which embarrasses him or to relate to the matter that brings him shame in his presence. When does the above apply? In regard to matters between one man and another. However, in regard to spiritual matters, if a transgressor does not repent after being admonished in private, he may be put to shame in public and his sin may be publicized. Now, this is the Rambam refining the mitzvah. He may be subjected to abuse, scorn, and curses until he repents, as was the practice of all the prophets of Israel. Now, a little less than prophets are we. He even gave us the whole colleague scenario, like the Rambam was thinking. What about if it's a colleague? There are others in our lives who we feel like need to be publicly scorned or shamed for what they have and what they did do, have done, did do, are doing. Now, the idea that it's all, and here's the rub, it's all being discussed as a matter of what one does in public, doesn't really address the other side of what you said. What about if I move to a private location? What about if I have a chavruta? What about if I do all that? And then I have to say, what are sources that I know really allow me to do with a chavruta, a holy partner, that I don't do with everybody else? And I would say that you're in good stead with the sages who say that with my chavrusas, I have to really just lay it all out there. Now, my chavruta has a responsibility to sometimes help me refine the language I'm using and the thoughts I'm having, and whether or not it sounds like I'm really in this space of doing counterproductive malila, meaning bringing myself to words that are in a stream of only anger for no purpose other than to figure out, like, let's say there was some kavanah about A, how to live with that, B, how to navigate a discussion I was going to have, C, to bring myself some pleasure by expressing it once, but how many times do I really need to say it? All these things are very Jewish ways of following up on the question you're asking. So privately, yes, we say what's on our mind with the people or the person we trust as our chavruta in that mode. But we ask ourselves gatekeeper kind of questions and expect our chavrusas to ask us gatekeeper kind of questions in the way that I would go really through sources if I was teaching a full hour shiur just on this itself. And I think the best one to look at in the beginning of that is Kanei Lecha Chaver from Pirkei Avot, really is got a beautiful Avot Rabbi Natan commentary that brings us to a place where it says, listen, you reveal all your secrets, you say what's on your mind, you don't have the kind of filter that you might have otherwise with people, but you eat together, you sleep together, you refine each other's thinking, you figure out if you said something's tahor, how it might be tameh, how if it's tameh, impure, it might be pure. There's ways that you're supposed to talk in here to throw it around in every which way that you shouldn't be offended by. People want to say only this and pure, pure evil. Well, you should be open to saying pure good. And your chavruta is allowed to do that, not just listen and say amen, amen, amen. That's really the challenge within that Avot Rabbi Natan source. Now, I brought you, what happens though when it gets too public? It immediately made me think of, as I'm reading the Gemara, the Scarlet Letter. Because in Puritan New England, this was really a methodology, and Hawthorne was really critical of the Puritans' approach to this, right? Thus, she will be a living sermon against sin until the ignominious letter shall be engraved upon her tombstone, right? This is what they thought, that it would really work to make public shaming part and parcel. It gets back to thought that goes long beyond that. Did a little bit of research in the idea of public shaming and where it comes in literature. And that is, first you see in Antigone about Creon publicly condemning and shaming Antigone for defying his edict by burying her brother Polynices. So here you have Sophocles really using the public shaming in the tale. In Homer's Iliad, Achilles experiences a form of public shaming when Agamemnon seizes his war prize, Briseis. It's not that judicial sense of public shaming, it's a public affront to Achilles' honor.
What's the word used after war prize, seizes his war prize, what?
Briseis.
What is that
Character.
word?
Is a character, person.
His war prize was a person.
Yeah.
Oh.
In Dante's Inferno, Dante Alighieri's epic vividly depicts public shaming in the form of eternal punishment in hell. So there's a connection to this whole Gehenna piece that I thought was interesting. Hawthorne came up in this search through the literary database I was in as being one of those real commentaries on just how public shaming could be. And I think if you take a look at, this is a topic that came up as my kids when they read 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale, and each of them had public shaming as a central piece of the culture that developed. And that is, public shaming in Orwell's dystopian society takes the form of ritualized propaganda like the 2 minutes hate that would be designed to direct collective hostility towards enemy of the state. And in the Handmaid's Tale, you have this absolute public shaming, rituals of public shaming, and women are compelled to punish each other in public as a public spectacle. Now that gets violent as well. But the violence of the women against expressed beliefs in words kind of is the equal and opposite. They're expressing what might be the righteous words and being bloodied for it. Here, our sages are saying you're literally shedding blood with the wrong words themselves. So I thought these connections were really fascinating, and that as part of world literature and part of the debate about where shame fits in, Rambam ultimately is going to say there's sometimes when it sounds to him like he may be subjected to being publicly shamed, and we have to decide just when the time is, if that's the normative halacha. Lastly, I'll just say that many authorities in modern times have said that part of the decline of civilization is thrusting insults and the kind of abusive speech towards each other that we're witnessing or would witness when they created the Chuvot, which were created about mid-20th century. They believed that a little along the lines here of, who was it? Tipper Gore, I believe, was very much about limiting kind of words and speech and music that she thought didn't really didn't address the kind of values that we wanted in the marketplace. What's that?
He was laughed at for it.
And she was laughed at for it, but that it really became part and parcel of both political hope and religious hope being expressed in Chuvot, and that we should guard our ears from insults that were even made for script and television, because there started to be a lot more insult. And it was at that time that people kind of ruled that you really couldn't buy a TV. Because some of the comedy was really cute and self-deprecating, but some was based on a lot of insult. And so some first conversations about the modern marketplace of insult were happening around that time. Just a really interesting technology, culture, and halacha kind of confrontation.
Don't we have a lot in our tradition that is public shaming? What do you do to the heretic in Judaism?
Well, according to this, you could absolutely go through some of those motions and shofech damim and be a murderer. So we're going to get to a story in our part of the Gemara here, which is going to debate some of this stuff, because we do have mechanisms to say about someone they're wrong. We have mechanisms to act on the fact that when they're wrong, we should excommunicate them.
Yeah,
And we have the power of knowing that we're right, but then the question becomes, what do we do about using our words and our power to make rules, laws, policies, and penalties when it comes to all of that? And that's what this part of the Gemara is about. And that's where we're headed.
It's hard not to immediately reflect on the fact that if you post something on X and you have 5 million followers, you in fact have the marketplace in the speed of an electron. You don't have to do anything else in order to have created a public shaming. So I think we've just increased the ease with which people can act out and things everything, and decreases the meaning of any of it. And ultimately, if everybody is shaming everybody else, then the notion of shaming loses its value, its social value, as maintaining societal norms.
They still hold its being a weapon for hurting people.
Yeah, for sure.
Even though it's
I'm
all around.
not minimizing
I
that.
mean, it still has the same power, because every time it may not affect others as much because they see a lot of it, but the object of the shaming is still going to be very effective, even though it's pervasive.
Well,
I mean,
I think I'm going to push back a little bit, because I think we've now reached the point where whole segments of the society don't feel shame, no matter how much they're shamed. And that's an equally dangerous place to be in. But I think that's what's actually happened here, is shame has lost its cohesive value because it's been denigrated. What?
I think we do see a segment that has no shame, but you've got children that are online and all of that, and teenagers, and all
Sure,
of
no,
that is very hurtful.
There are still vulnerable populations, but I'm just saying overall, I think that fewer and fewer people actually respond to public shaming. And some of them actually invite it. So it's a very fluid dynamic here, but I think the changes are happening over a very, very short period of time, relative to the way in which social structures traditionally have evolved over much longer periods of time. And it's the technology that drives the speed and the potential.
yeah. So I would say that the Gemara is challenging us in a certain way to, as we are in the marketplace, to consider just what words we will share, just what words we will listen to, what we will pay attention to, what captures the imagination of the 5 million or the 5 billion people across the world in one click of a post button, right? The question will be, okay, at a certain point, do we realize it's really a powerful tool to impacting people in a way we've yet to explore, and therefore we will figure out how to spread a certain kind of lesson and light that comes by using these tools? And are we seeing first the corruption, and in its quick and kind of way, Moore's law of not just the chip, but the way that these technologies develop so that we get faster and faster about sharing our frustrations, the words of humiliation that we want to visit on somebody. Like, what will it be that will help change this if we are able to notice how deadly this is? And so by us learning the Gemara about it and noting how deadly it can be, it moves us towards thinking through how we're going to engage these technologies, to me anyway, what kind of use they could have, what way we reclaim the kind of holy shame that we're kind of talking about and referencing in the midst of this discussion of the shameless, seemingly shameless society, to say just about anything, call each other names, and catch the news cycle, because it's so addictive for human beings. And so because it's so addictive, the rabbis are helping us come down. The rabbis are helping us get off of this stuff by bringing it to our full attention. And it's also that since we can use it in certain ways, and we are apt to, within the, again, the quote unquote marketplace of our lives, we want to be thinking about how it comes to play within and among our colleagues, which is why the Rambam kept it to colleagues and friends, if you will, chaverim. And I'm going to move us to that very famous part of this sugya, and not do a lot of these inner kinds of one versus and another about the intercourse and the woman and the proof texts. And I'm going to ultimately show you one piece here that's become a famous piece, and we may not ultimately get here we go. And we may not only get to the very, very end of the entire story in as deep a way as we want to, but remember that tonight, just in terms of housekeeping, we are meeting tonight. We're not meeting next week before Thanksgiving. December 4th is the gallery opening, so please come to that fantastic
Very
event.
interesting show. Please try and come. The artist is going to be talking. She's lovely. And you'll get a postcard momentarily describing the show a little
So
bit.
that's December 4th, and then we're on break, if you will, until January the 8th. So we have a nice long winter recess here. So great semester, packed in a lot to these couple of classes. Here we go. Very famous story. In many conservative circles, this story is used to prove the power of the sages and their adjudicating laws and matters within the context of the historical generation they live, the science they know, the knowledge they bring to bear, and they like to stop at that place where it says, Lo b'shamayim hi. The law is not in heaven. But that is really only a small part and an angle of this very famous story that exists in the context now that we've been learning. And that is in the context of Onat Devarim, in the context of verbal mistreatment, abuse, humiliation, and where it leads, and what kind of world it creates. Okay, so Tanu Hatam. Appropriate, apropos of topic of verbal mistreatment, Hatacho chuliot v'natan chol ben chulia lechulia, Rabbi Eliezer mitaher, v'chachamim mitam'in. We learned in a Mishnah in Kalim, different part of the Mishnah, that if one cut an earthenware oven widthwise into segments and placed sand between each and every segment, Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure because of the sand between these different pieces, that it's not completely a vessel, and therefore it's not susceptible to ritual impurity. And the rabbis deem it ritually impure. Now, just set it up that there's a disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages vis-a-vis this type of oven. Remember, in the ancient world, you can make an oven out of circles of clay and sand in between them, and you can have a lid on this, and inside the oven, it gets really hot because of the fire, and you can place things down, kind of down near the fire because you have stones down there, and it's kind of like your oven racks. And then you could also pop bread on the side of those rings and make your pita and carefully take them in and out of this dome-like oven. And there's some idea about this kind of oven, not exactly with due respect to Rabbi Steinsaltz, because it's not susceptible to ritual impurity because it's not a complete vessel. It might be also talking about the fact that since it was cut apart and it's no longer usable the way it used to be used, that it's like a repurposed set of rings that I got from a different oven, and I put them together with sand and mortar between them. And since it really was broken down and couldn't be used as its original thing, and it can be created into a new oven now, then it's fine and it's pure. But the Chachamim were saying it's ritually impure because it was an oven and it still is an oven. But that's a different take from a different set of commentaries on the beginning of the sugya. Certainly, there's a disagreement. The sages disagree with one Rabbi Eliezer. And here's a picture, by the way, of what that looks like. The oven of Achnai. Cut widthwise according to the parallel lines in the illustrations, considered a broken vessel, incapable of contracting ritual impurity, even if it is later reassembled. Okay. V'zeh hu tanur shel Achnai. My Achnai. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel shehikifu dvarim ke'achvazo v'timuhu. Tana ba'oto ayom heishiv Rabbi Eliezer kol tshuvot sheba'olam v'lo kiblu hemenu. So they're talking about this oven of Achnai, which is made with these rings, as we discussed, and the sand between, and whether it was pure or impure. Remember, who's the pure? Let's see. Eliezer says it's pure, and the rabbis say it is impure. And then what's the real issue at hand? That Rabbi Eliezer brings every kind of answer in the world to support his opinion that it's pure. Let's just keep all things straight all the time. Rabbi Eliezer says it's pure. He brings all kinds of proofs that it's pure. And what do those proofs look like? Famous elements of this supernatural halachic story. Amar lehem, im halacha kamoti, if the halacha is like me, haruv zeh yochiach. Let this carob tree jump up and prove it. And the carob tree was then nekar, charuv mimkomo me'ama, 100 different 100 cubits. This carob tree jumped from its place. Va'amrila arba ma'orama. And some say the carob tree that he asked to move jumps up from its place and goes 400 cubits. What's a cubit? How do we measure it? Elbow to the top of either this finger or this finger. So Amulo, the sages say to him, Ein nevi'in raya min hacharuv. There's no carob tree that proves anything. Rabbi Eliezer. Chazar va'amar lahem. He goes and says to them, Im halacha kamoti, if the law is like me, like my position that it's, Rabbi Eliezer says it's pure. Amar amayim yochichu. Let the stream prove it. Chazru amar amayim la'achareihem. The entire current of this stream changes after Rabbi Eliezer asks for it. Amrulo, they say to him, Ein mevi'in raya me amar amayim. You can't bring proof from some stream that flows backwards. Chazar va'amar lehem. He comes back and says, Im halacha kamoti. If the halacha is like me, that's pure. Kot le veda midrash yochichu. Let the walls of the study hall prove it. He too kot le veda midrash lipol. And then the walls of the study hall tilt inwards to fall down. Ga'ar behem Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua rises up. And he scolds those walls, and he says to them, Amar lahem, im talmidei chachamim minatzchim ze et ze b'halacha, atem ma tivachem. If Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, what part do you have in this? Get out of this argument. You have no part in this machloket. Lo naflu mipnei chavodo shel Rabbi Yehoshua, v'lo zakfu mipnei chavodo shel Rabbi Eliezer. The walls don't fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yehoshua, and they don't straighten because of the deference due Rabbi Eliezer. They still remain leaning to this day. The leaning walls of Pumbedita. No, not Pumbedita. Leaning walls of somewhere in Eretz Yisrael.
And the moral is?
Chazar v'amar lehem.
Got another way.
Chazar v'amar lehem. Im halacha kamoti. If the law is like me, mina shamayim yochichu. Let heaven prove it. Yatzta bat kol. A bat kol comes. Remember, that's the daughter of the voice, the echo of the Kudsha Barichu, the echo of the Shekhinah, the echo of the Holy One. Va'amra, feminine. Malachem etzel Rabbi Eliezer shehalacha kamoto b'chol makom. Why are you differing? Why are you defying Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, al raglav. Rabbi Yoshua stands up on his feet and says, Lo v'shamayim he. The law is not in heaven. It's by us. That's the Chachamim's purview to figure out the law. No godly voice comes. Now, hold aside that we have a different Gemara in Yevamot that says when Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are arguing, who comes to tell us that the Hillel halacha is actually the halacha we use? The bat kol. Okay. The bat kol, the voice of God. So hold that aside. Keep that a separate part. We'll learn that sugi as well. But okay, here Rabbi Yoshua says, no, it's not in heaven. Lo b'shamayim. V'mai lo b'shamayim he. What does it really mean? Lo b'shamayim he. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Shekavar nitna Torah mehar Sinai. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Ein anu mashkichin bevat kol. And since we got the Torah at Mount Sinai, we've been in the base midrash figuring it out on our own. And the sages like to learn it out, and we determine the law. And that is what we do. And we don't really mashkichin bevat kol. We don't really give honor to the voice of God, to the vat kol. Shekavar katavta bahar Sinai b'Torah, because God, you wrote yourself in the Torah, acharei rabim la'atot. The majority will be the one who rules. After the majority, you shall incline. So the majority ruling is the way that I'm going to figure this out. But of course, what does that give rise to? We'll say what that gives rise to in a minute. Ashkechei Rabbi Natan Eliyahu. Before we kind of cut to a different place on the stage. And Eliyahu has been watching this the whole time. That's Elijah the prophet. And Elijah sitting over there says, Amarle, my Aved Kuchabarichu, Bahahi Shata. What did God do at that time? That God sent down the Bat Kol, and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yirmiyah really proved that they're not really listening anymore to the Bat Kol, and Rabbi Eliezer sitting out there left to dry. Amarle, he says to him, Elijah says, Kachayech v'amar. The Holy One, blessed be he smiles and says, Nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. My children have, now you could say linatzeach is to triumph, so that's why it's translated this way over here. My children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Or you could say, there's two repetitions of it. I got to find two different ways to say what it means. My children have triumphed over me. Nitzchuni benai, they will forever maintain course if this is what they're committed to find the law generation after generation, interpret it and reinterpret it as is necessary in their own zeitgeist, in their own venue, in their own purview, in their own context. Because Netzach can mean forever. And Linatzeach, even though I might say in a folksy way, that's how I say it, they triumphed over me, I can splice it because it's mentioned twice, and I could say they triumphed over me. This is what's going to maintain my people. So the idea that, as I mentioned, progressive and even continuous revelationists really love about this sugya to this point is that it seems like a majority rule is the way to go, and that that's what's going to keep God laughing and smiling at his children, and that there's no supernatural intervention when it comes to Jewish law anymore, and that it's going to be the way that I continue door to door, generation to generation. And I see that Rabbi Yirmiyah stood up kind of as the next to Rabbi Yeshua, who's really talking about Rabbi Eliezer, who's the older generation, who's kind of a conservative personality in this small c. So I have lots of different kinds of things.
The Eliezer is conservative and older.
He is a guy who keeps to the learning and is the repository of it all and can tell you what the halacha is anytime you need it, and is known as that conservationist type of personality of tradition and law.
But he seems to be making the argument that the vessel can be become pure again, which seems to be a flexible point of view as opposed to the more traditional.
Exactly. So one needs to understand from the context of the entire story, thank you, that sometimes we forget that he's the one permitting the usage. And when people want to use it for the very, very paradigmatic way that we think about halacha, he actually says, no, it's permitted because of all we've learned before. Guys, if you would only take what we learned before and understand it to the degree you need to, and mitahir, you're mitame. I purified this. You guys say this is tameh, you can't use it. What are you gonna do? You're not gonna have an oven if you go to Chachamim. That's the irony of such a deep use of this text to support what we consider to be the progressive or continuous revelation theory. That's one deep irony here. The other is that the story really is in the context of Onat Devarim, and now we're going to see that these newer Lo B'Shamayim He sages, the ones who figure out the Jewish law, are going to really commit in short form, and we're going to do this the next time that we meet. It's a big cliffhanger now for many weeks, but we're going to talk about how the tyranny of the majority is what the Gemara really wants to show you. That's it. Zero Adkan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Before that, an early Shabbat Shalom, and Hannah and Aaron Kronik are celebrating the bat mitzvah of their daughter Dalia with a nice luncheon for everyone in the shul, and we're looking forward to a big simcha at Zarua this Shabbos. So see you for holy times.
Yes, the Simchas.
Amen. Be well.
Thank you. You too.